Okay, so we can let folks into this meeting now, please.
Recording in progress. Your line is now muted.
Someone will need to mute. Thank you. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our 5th meeting of the Massachusetts Deconstruction Workgroup. My name is Kathy Mirza, and I'm the new branch chief for the municipal waste reduction programs here at MassDEP. Brooke Nash retired in July, so I'm now working with Janice Perret from our MassDEP staff to help steer our efforts on reuse of buildings and building materials. These meetings are designed to connect stakeholders from all perspectives to share what we know, learn together, and take meaningful steps to support this important part of the reuse industry here in Massachusetts. So today's meeting features 3 case studies of Massachusetts-based deconstruction projects. And we're eager to highlight some of the important work that's already happening with local practitioners who are leading the way. Before we dive into the meeting itself, we like to begin with a few housekeeping reminders. First, please note this meeting is being recorded and that this recording will be made available to all attendees and posted on MassDEP's website. I'd like to ask if you could also be sure that your name and organization are visible on screen. So if you are not familiar with Zoom, if you would please go to your image and click on the 3 dots in the top right corner of your image and then hit rename. You can also go to the participants icon and rename yourself there as well. We also ask that you keep your microphone on mute during the presentations to minimize any background noise. And if you have questions or any information to share, please use the chat box throughout the webinar today. We also reserve time at the end of the meeting for Q&A for all of our speakers. So we leave about a half hour at the end there. So as we get started, as we do with all of our meetings, we like to take a brief poll to get a pulse on who's here today and so that everyone else can see who is here today. So Janice, if you would please launch the first poll, and if folks would just select here, take a moment. Now I see that we have probably about half of the folks who will end up showing up today who are here already, but this might still give us a good little snapshot as we begin. We will give it just a couple more seconds. So Janice, if you'd like to, looks like we have most people and 95% participated. So if you want to share the results, are you able to do that?
It said share. Oops, share.
Okay, so it looks like we have a nice spattering. We've got architects, engineers, and contractors, government, historic preservation, deconstruction, contractors, reuse organizations, consultants, waste and recycling, and others. So excellent. So thank you all for taking that time to let us know who's on the call with us today. The other thing that we always ask as well at the beginning of these meetings is whether it's okay if we share your contact information with others who ask us for it. So briefly, if you can just say, yes, it's okay to share your email address. And this is only for workgroup participants who are explicitly requesting so that they can connect with you and network offline. For those who prefer not to share their contact information, I mark your name very explicitly in the list that I keep so that we do not share that out. We just want to respect your wishes here and just get your permission for those who are okay with sharing. So we just wait a couple more seconds. If we get close, we're about 90% of folks have participated. If everyone else could just give us a yes or a no, that would be great. Okay, great, Janice. I think we could probably close it there. So that's just something that I'm going to keep on file for the folks that prefer not to have that shared. So thank you. Are you still seeing my screen?
No.
You're not. Okay. Hold on a minute, please. Just had many things open here and I clicked on wrong things. So give me a moment, please. Okay, back again. Excellent.
Yes.
So, okay. So very quick introduction for those who are new to this work group. MassDEP established their Reduce and Reuse working group as part of our 2030 Solid Waste Master Plan. And at the end of 2021, we released our state's very first Reduce and Reuse Action Plan, as we are really working to direct more attention to the reduction of upstream waste and greenhouse gas emissions. And through numerous stakeholder meetings, we identified building materials as a priority stream for reuse. So this led to the development of our deconstruction work group. Our kickoff meeting was last September, and we have learned a lot over the last 13 months since we formed this work group. We plan to meet on a quarterly basis and take deep dives like this into various issues and resources that can enable growth in the building reuse sector. So I want to introduce our planning team. There have been a few changes here. All of the work that we do and what we decide to bring together to share with you is led by this planning team that represents industry, nonprofit, and officials from federal, state, and local government. Now, these are the leaders and practitioners who are doing the work on the ground, and so we're in really good hands here. You'll notice a few new faces here since Brooke Nash retired this summer, and Dave Giese from Deconstruction Works has moved to Northern New England. So they are no longer a part of the planning team, but we have 3 new people helping us, and we are delighted to have them here. We have Allison Frizzy from the Boston Preservation Alliance, Kristen Fritsch from Elkis Manfredi Architects, and Randy Scott from Select Demo Services. So we are sincerely grateful that they have joined us in this planning work. This slide just gives you, you've seen this before, for those who've come before, this is a snapshot of the goals that we have for this working group. And take your time to check this out. But while DEP uses a waste reduction lens for the work that we do, our goals dovetail with a variety of sectors. So these meetings really serve to educate and share knowledge across all stakeholder groups as we explore reuse market opportunities, local deconstruction practitioners and practices, adaptive reuse, and supporting policies and incentives to help us move forward. If you missed any of our 4 previous meetings, all of the recordings and presentations can be found on MassDEP's website at the link that's provided on the slide that will be shared with all of you. And they were terrific meetings, so I encourage you to check them out. The presentations and the recordings themselves are available for you. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Pam Holland, who's going to introduce our agenda and our speakers for today.
So Louise, back to you.
So Pam, if you would like to do introductions now, please.
Oh, there's that mute button. Sorry.
Okay.
So I want to thank everybody for taking this time to join us to get a view of the deconstruction field in Massachusetts. Our 3 speakers will give you a picture of the broader New England scene along the continuum of the industry. So Peter Serafino will start from the residential development of affordable housing. Kristen Fritsch will bring us to the commercial and university scale with deconstruction and reuse of an urban academic building. And finally, Dan Costello will take us to the large scale industrial setting on the Boston seaport. After their presentations, you'll see that deconstruction has an important role in the health of our planet. But also today, we're going to have a glimpse of what our future holds for deconstruction in the circular, no waste economy. The enormity of the Inflation Reduction Act will change how we all approach our work. I hope that you'll have time to join a Build Reuse webinar at 3:30 this afternoon. We're involving and beginning to involve partnerships from all over the country to, develop embodied carbon strategies. So please go to buildreuse.org and attend that if you can. First of all, Peter, thank you. Peter has been putting projects together for affordable housing and what I call obtainable housing for 30 years. He has envisioned projects from capturing the first pre-development money to managing on-site construction. His experience encompasses the leading edge of nonprofit affordable housing development in the country. These leaders are the community builders, wayfinders, and home city housing development. For the whole range of those organizations, and Peter's experience takes us through the whole range of small rural housing production to urban mixed use housing production. He's been in the center of environmental issues as part of this. So Peter, I can't count all the units you've brought into service, but please describe how deconstruction plays a part in your sector.
Sure. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.
So, yeah, as Pam mentioned, I'm a developer of affordable housing working for a not-for-profit organization, and we sort of have become an accidental participant in deconstruction and recycling, and our case study is kind of illustrative of that, and I'll walk you through it. You see in this first slide the picture of the finished product, a very handsome-looking brick school building, and we were fortunate that we were able to recycle it, if you will, reuse it. It's an adaptive reuse. It was originally built as a school building, and now it is 42 units of affordable rental housing. Next slide, please. Brief overview of home city development. We've been around for quite some time and very active, particularly in the last 10 years. Mostly rehabilitating housing. We actually have a new construction in the town of Pelham that we just started last week. So very active in the field of development. And often when we deal with our colleagues, we deal with a lot of folks in a lot of state agencies, particularly the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. But, oftentimes we're dealing with MassDEP on, dirty soils and asbestos and riverfront redevelopment issues, and in this case our intersection with DEP was on sort of recycling and reuse of a school. And next slide, please. So our goal when we started was to create 42 rental apartments, and this tells you a little bit about it, and the affordability that we're trying to achieve. 15 apartments for extremely low income people, and others, the 7 apartments for what are known as workforce housing, folks at 80% of area median income. That's kind of the things that drive us. And you see in the background there a historic picture of the school that was built in 1925. Next photo, please. Next slide, please. Again, a little bit of detail about who we build for and what are some of the important elements of the property. Next slide, please. And again, there's a picture of it in the mid to late 20s when it was first brought online. And next slide, please. And one more, please. So this is the building around the time that we purchased it in 2018. And the interesting thing about this building is that on June 1st, 2011, it was hit by the tornado that went through Springfield. So particularly these black plywood pieces that you see in the foreground on the right side, the right foreground, that's really where the building was hit by the tornado. And what happened was that was in 2011. We bought the building in 2018. And what we acquired was, if you can just imagine this type of school building, we've all been in those kind of buildings. And just imagine that the city had kind of walked out the day after the tornado and left everything in that building. So anything and everything you could imagine that was in a school building was stuff that we inherited and had to figure out what to do about. And as I said, we're housing developers, and all of a sudden we had a couple of years to ponder how do we get rid of this stuff? And first of all, it's expensive to get rid of this stuff, and we knew that sending it to landfill just didn't make sense. And I saw lots of scrap metal. I said, oh, well, we're going to make some money on this. Well, of course, that was not to be. And I was very fortunate that between Abby Massaro and then Lenny Freed from the Old Stone Mill Center Zero Waste Maker Space in Adams, Mass, they were my two gurus. I didn't know anything about how to go about getting rid of all the stuff that was in this building, and I'll show you some pictures of that. But between Abby and Lenny, they gave me all the guidance I needed, and it took a lot of time. I mean, we had the financing mechanisms for affordable housing. And here we were also using state and federal historic tax credits. So it takes a lot of time. It takes many cycles of application. So we had some time to sort of, while we were waiting for all our financing to come together, to figure out a way to get rid of and recycle and reuse as much of this as possible. Next slide, please. So again, just the building was built in 1925, hit by the tornado in 2011 and closed. And then by 2020, we started the process of emptying the building of all the contents. Next slide, please. And here's an example of what happened inside the building after it was hit by the tornado. And the tornado hit late in the afternoon. The kids had actually been dismissed from the school by that time, and really only the principal was remaining in the building at the time. Next slide, please. That's an example of what that corridor looked like as well. Next slide, please. We'll go through a couple of these pretty quickly. So, and we'll see some more images of what was in the building, but we ended up recycling over 23 tons of material. It was scrap metal. There were books. I think the city maybe brought books into the building after it was closed, quite honestly. I didn't think they had that many books in a regular school building. And you can see some of the other items that we quantified when we were done. Next slide, please. Again, just an example of the conditions in which we found the building. This was actually somewhat of a staged photo. We had a group of photographers who have a business of, they have access to abandoned buildings, and other photographers pay to go in for a couple hours and take pictures. So they did and they love buildings like this. They've gone to prisons, state hospitals, and so I've got a lot of good photos that they took of the inside of this building. It was good to document. Next slide, please. And so here's an example of all the books. There's the former gymnasium at the building, and we hired an organization called ROCA, which works with at-risk youth. Youth have had experiences with the criminal justice system, and they helped us. It was a hot summer, and they cleared out all this during the pandemic. They cleared out the whole building for us. They did a great job. Next slide, please. So again, examples of some of the materials: folding chairs, desks, you name it. Next slide, please. A lot of useless TV, monitors that were mounted up on the walls in the classrooms, just, out of date now. Next slide, please. I thought scrap metal was worth something, not at the time that we were trying to get rid of it. So a lot of lockers that had to get out of here. Next slide, please. And again, this is a list of some of the folks that, it went from Roslindale to the Berkshires. Folks that between Abby and Lenny, they helped us reach out to lots of folks who came in, with schools, it was summer camps. My favorite was a cheesemaker from Leominster who came in and he deconstructed a walk-in cooler and took it back and used it. And so that was something I didn't have to pay to get rid of. And that was great. And we had folding cafeteria tables and cork boards and just, you name it, we were able to get rid of it. And lots of good organizations got the benefit of that. I wish we could have done more. Unfortunately, books just really, we weren't able to reuse. We opened up the building one Saturday for hoping a lot of teachers would come in and take books, and we didn't get rid of as much stuff as we would have liked that way. Next slide, please. And then here's just an example of sort of how we, some construction photos. And if you want to just go next slide, please. Solar panels on the roof. So we're taking an older building and making it a modern building. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. We'll go through a couple of these photos. So next slide. So these are just examples of finished product. We added an elevator to the building as well. Next slide. Next slide. And this was the basement of the building, which we excavated some area ways so that there'd be light and air down there. Next slide, please. And here, here we are when we were done. We had restored some architectural finishes. If you look at the window detail at the far left end, that was missing. That's what it looked like originally, but it had been removed over the years, and as part of the historic rehabilitation, we restored that. And next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide. And of course, as any good developer, you have to celebrate your success. And this is Congressman Neal and Mayor Sarno, and the woman in the background with the mask was the principal who was in the building the day that it got hit by the tornado. And the city built a new school, basically, a block away, and she's still the principal. And she had the best story to tell about her experiences there. And as I said, our experience in before we could even start developing this affordable housing was, figuring out a way to recycle and reuse this material. And I think it was the story within the story, if you will. And I'm really proud of the work that we did and very happy for the guidance we received in that. And it helped a lot of organizations, and it kept materials out of the landfills. And I think it was a success all around. It saved us all. And my primary motivating factor at the beginning was I need to save money. But by the time we were done, I think I was happier of what we accomplished from a perspective of recycling and reuse. And next and final slide, please. And that's my presentation.
Thank you. I had to unmute for a second there.
Yeah,
Thank
me
you
too.
so much, Peter. That was fantastic. I'm sure there will be lots of questions when we get to the Q&A, but we're going to pivot and just do the presentations first and then have that at the end. So Pam, it's all yours.
So Annie, Kristen Fritsch is our next speaker. She initiates and implements sustainability strategies as an architect with Elkus Manfredi Architects in historic building reuse, as well as projects that she will describe today in new construction. I realized that as I drive from the West End of Boston, every time I look at that New Balance building, and now I will see Manfredi Architects. If you're going in from the Mass Pike. Anyway, Kristen's work incorporates systems research and tracking of embodied carbon and healthy materials to achieve the U.S. Green Building Council's goals for 2030. Kristen brings her grasp of biomimicry into the design process, and I hope, Kristen, that you'll give us an example that will point us to biomimicry, how you've used that. She serves on the lead materials tag group and on the board of Built Environment Plus. This experience will offer us all a lot because our community is going to become more and more focused on documentation and accountability in terms of carbon reduction. And I really think that we're going to be relying on you, Kristen. So thank you. Go ahead.
That's a lot of pressure, Pam. So yeah, as she said, I'm Kristen Fritsch, sustainability coordinator. So we have a 230 person design firm, and we mostly do core shell office buildings, lab office buildings, and multifamily residential around the Boston area and some other states too. And we also do a lot of commercial interiors projects, so a couple 100,000 square feet fit outs in existing buildings. And then we have some higher ed projects where we do planning as well as campus housing and special classroom buildings. So we didn't use biomimicry necessarily on this project for Simmons, but except for the fact that, you know, we want to be efficient with our resources, and I'm sure there's plenty of animal species and plant species out there that use and are minimal waste. But today we'll talk a little bit about our project with Simmons, where we were doing a master plan or a plan for their campus that involved demolition of one building, unfortunately, but we'll talk a little bit about that. So next slide. Typically on projects, what I help teams with is you know, overall sustainable opportunities and what that looks like for waste prevention and design projects. Where you know, for new spaces, we're always trying to design, first of all, if we're doing new buildings, they need to be resilient, flexible, durable, and timeless, so that they will not need to be removed in the future, or that they can easily be adapted into new spaces or new uses. And then we're starting, one thing we're starting to look at a little more is how can we actually design in detail for deconstruction, and which is a little more challenging because we've gotten used to a lot of adhesives in this industry. But we are working on that. We have a 30-person QA/QC group that is always trying to better ourselves in that way. And then existing spaces were you know, if we come in and do a new fit out for for a client, how can we reuse what's there and repurpose things that we don't need in the space? And a lot of times it's always just good for the bottom line too, right, for clients. And then we're minimizing finished materials and selecting low carbon products. So that's something we're always improving on. And then encouraging the building owners to divert as much as possible from the landfill when we do have to, you know, remove a building. So let's talk about this last one a little bit. Next slide. So how do we engage owners to do this? It's really challenging because there isn't really a role for that person on a project. So who organizes this effort is always a big question. And if you don't have someone on the team that's really passionate about this, then it's challenging. And then short timelines, right? We're always on really tight timelines, and sometimes these things take a lot of process and thought. And then, you know, we do see a surplus of items used in the marketplace. Like Peter mentioned, you know, metal isn't always desirable. Things like lockers or things like that you think are pretty useful and could have a new life are hard to get rid of. Next slide. So this is the plan of the building. It's 4 stories, and you can see it's a I think it was 1970s. I wasn't the project architect, so sorry if I forget a few details, but essentially it had asbestos and mastic behind the brick and on some of the walls on the interior. So it wasn't a clean building. But the goal of the campus, if you know Simmons, are on a very tight campus organized around a quad. And then they have a residential campus or residential kind of block that's a couple blocks away and disconnected from their campus. And to improve their efficiency on their campus, you know, of staff and just having their students closer together and their assets, they wanted to put everything in that one quad and move forward with bringing their residential to their main campus. So this building housed their sciences. So biology, chemistry, psych, nursing, nutrition, and physics. So a lot on 4 floors, with a lecture hall and offices for all the professors as well. So it was a lot, and it was very much a maze. Every floor was a maze. Having remodeled over years and tried to incorporate the space. So we were brought in, we did a plan for them, and we were able to move all those programs to their existing buildings around the quad, and refresh those, and they all got new labs and new spaces. And then this project was slated to be removed, and then there is a residential tower that will go in its place with the new health and fitness center and some other support things for the campus. So this will help Simmons continue to grow and be successful. Next slide. So we started by connecting with the city of Boston. I heard about their zero waste pilot program and had met Susan through the CLF reuse group. And so we connected with them, and she brought in Abby with Recycling Works, and through kind of other groups that I'm involved in, Michael was also brought in as sort of a consultant. And the project had a tight timeline. Of course, we had no budget for this, and it wasn't in the initial conversation. So we were sort of coming in during the process and trying to bring awareness to the possibilities. And Skanska was the contractor. And there was also a little, there's always complications with the timelines of permitting and contract things. So we were sort of working outside of that and just trying to do as much as we could. So we really informally identified these goals. This is a learning opportunity for all of us. Maybe we can, understand the hurdles and how to get around them. Maybe we can get some cost data from the contractor and the impact of the waste diversion and how, it might benefit the university or not. And then how do these reuse vendors, who are the reuse vendors and material streams that we could work with? Next slide. So this is just a really quick timeline. So we started this in spring of 2022, and we also at the same time, the contractor had already organized a demolition bidders walkthrough, and the project was supposed to get started right away with the bidding and then demolition. And so we were under the impression it was a very tight process. But you can see at the end there, summer 2023 is when abatement finally started. And so we kind of went from this thinking that things were going to start, in the fall of 2022, and we would just get every month like, okay, well, it's not this month. It's not this month. So we were always working under that, well, what can we do next to just make an improvement? So next slide. So one of the first things we did when we walked through is we came back and asked for another walkthrough, and Simmons, of course, was excited to be part, they wanted to do whatever they could. And so Susan and Abby pulled together vendors that we could bring through. We walked through with them, and a couple of them put together proposals for removing all of the loose thing or anything that was reusable in the building. We had certain restrictions because of the asbestos. So like those red fume hoods along the back there, they are built in. We couldn't remove those because they were attached to the walls. We couldn't remove anything that was attached to walls. But we went through and kind of identified these opportunities and hurdles. And then at the same time, Michael Orbank was great. He was really helpful in going through and looking at the carpet, the ceiling tile, and the doors that don't usually get picked up, and seeing if those manufacturers who now have, a lot of those manufacturers have take back programs. He was key in getting the details on whether or not we could get those taken back, which would involve the contractor removing those, storing them, and then sending them off to those vendors. So we were gathering a lot of information and kind of finding people who could use the things that were left in the building. And as you can see, they got a whole new lab space and science facilities. And so a lot of the equipment didn't make it the cut. They either got new equipment, or some of the stuff was just so outdated or broken. that, or, just wasn't useful anymore. So there were a lot of loose things in the program or in the building. In short, the estimates came in under $100,000 for someone to come in and remove all the things and then take care of distributing them to nonprofits or whoever would you take them. But because the project was in it was contractually wasn't as clean and neat as you would hope, and the project also was value engineering at the same time. So they were trying to cut things from the budget of the new building. So they absolutely had zero funds to spend on this. And so we had to start thinking about how can we recover this without the use of the organizations that would come in and do that for them. Next slide. So this is just a few more photos of things that were left in there. Sometimes we would open drawers and cupboards and there were full of glass funnels or test tubes, or we found a closet full of antique science equipment. And Simmons had already had all of their staff go through and pull things that they wanted for personal use or organizations. They had other universities in and other science departments come through and take things. And this is still what was remaining. Next slide. So as the timeline got really short, we did identify a couple groups that are a lot of people that were interested, but a couple groups really we knew would take a lot of the items, a bulk of the items, and that was Boston Building Resources, and then Household Goods out of Acton, who they basically have a whole they've housed or they furnish newly housed individuals. So they have a whole facility where they'll walk people through with social workers or with other departments around the state and furnish a whole entire house, put it in a truck, and then get these people outfitted with all new or all reused, but furnishings, from bedding to beds and couches and chairs and tables and such. So there were a lot of things in the building that were usable for that purpose. But the hurdles we kept coming against, or these walls we kept coming against, were these organizations really wanted the items, but they didn't have the people power to come and get them. And sometimes they didn't have the truck or the equipment. Simmons didn't have facility staff to do that as well. And the contractor wasn't quite contractually on board yet. So they couldn't, physically do it either. So as things were getting tight, we kind of figured out that, well, Elkis Manfredi, we like to do volunteer events, and we thought this would be a really good event to at least anyone who was interested could show up and help these two organizations fill their trucks. So we ended up going, I think it was on a Saturday, for about 4 or 5 hours, and we went through the building, and we had beforehand, we had Household Goods and Boston Building Resources go through and tag all the things that they wanted. And then we had our team of people, including my teenagers, go through and kind of move all those items to the loading area in separate piles, basically, so that the organizations could come at a later time and pick them up. So that was amazing to see, like, how much you can see the truck there, that Household Goods filled with just things that could go in an apartment building, or in an apartment or house, chairs and tables and shelving and things like that. That day also, everybody that volunteered, pretty much everybody, went home with at least a trunk load full of things that they could reuse. And then I ended up taking around 9 boxes of items to, I just did a Goodwill drop off of things that were left around the building, cups and plates and things like that. So next slide. So it just looked like we didn't even make a dent when we got through with that. But over the next couple of weeks, we found we had a little more time because the project had gotten stalled. So we reached out with Abby and Susan's help to some other groups, some schools. Boston Public Schools came in. There are some programs that outfit homeschool teachers and art students, art teachers and science teachers. And then also a bunch of artists came in and pulled out all kinds of equipment. On the right of the top right there, the picture of the meters, that's a guy that does robots made out of found objects. And in the middle there is a huge metal lathe that an artist got, which was quite a hefty item. And then, shelving and things like that people picked up. Next slide. So one of my favorite things was, Two Life Communities came through, and they removed a bunch of shelving and then kitchen cabinets and things like that, and right away installed them into a unit at senior affordable housing. And the picture on the bottom left of the shelving is also their storeroom, where they took the old shelving from Simmons and are reusing that. And then those pictures on the right are from the new Dorchester Food Co-op. So John Santos had come in and was really excited to find some fun things. So he had found this that structure that's holding all the plants in the biology lab and turned that into a they're growing tomatoes in it, and they have it right outside the store where people can walk up and take the tomatoes. And then under the purple cloth there in their store are some tables that they picked up from the school. And he came a few times and picked up a few things. You can see the pots that he grabbed in some chairs as well. The robots are in the little, you can find just a little Instagram robot manufacturing. He's made little robots out of the metal cars from the physics lab. So there's lots of fun things. I keep getting more slides and more pictures from people every week. Next slide. And then one of the science teachers sent this photo of a lot of the found objects that he took, and he had his students do some solar projects. So that's a list of just the main organizations that came in and removed items. We ended up removing a lot, a lot more than we thought was possible. Next slide. So here are some final stats. So we had over 17 organizations, and we ended up, I think it's more like 12.4 tons now, where it keeps changing because we get more data in. A lot of furniture, desk and chairs, things like that. And then a lot of glassware and lots of fun science things. Next slide. So for our part in the design industry, we're really realizing the need to really have a point person on a project that takes responsibility on this sort of thing and helps facilitate, because we don't always have a Susan or an Abby to help do that. So we're looking at how can we build that into projects. And then there's some other things we can do as well. The one of the main things we learned, and initially we thought, our role is to encourage the owner to divert as much as possible, but we also need to encourage designers to specify these materials. So that's one thing I'm really working on is how do we incorporate these into our designs? There's a lot of material, just even, for example, wood doors on projects that end up in the trash that can easily be refurbished. So highlighting manufacturers that have take back programs, like the ceiling tile and the carpet programs, and then letting them know that we want we'd like to see their products have reclaimed material in it. So I'm also part of a network of sustainability coordinators from design firms around the country, and we've worked together on a map of resources. I'll put that in the chat. But we're all there's a lot of us trying to think how we can improve improve this situation, and hopefully this is helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kristen. Pam?
Just, it's so encouraging, Kristen, when I think of the commitment that you have to have at this stage of the industry to reuse everything. I mean, it takes a major priority within everybody's realm or contact with the project, and I just am really grateful that you guys are out there trying to do this, and also on a national scale. So thank you for that. And now I get to introduce Dan Costello. Dan really set the pace for deconstruction in New England as early as the 1980s. He founded Costello Dismantling Company. And that was to meet more and more rigorous demands of demolition and recycling in the commercial, industrial, and governmental environments. Dan built this company by involving his family to become an internationally recognized leader in deconstruction and diverting wasted materials into reusable resources. And you can see this commitment from Dan on page 1 of his website that uses that really focuses on their mission of reusing spent materials as a central value in his company's whole history. Dan is on the board, or he's a former board member of the board of directors for the National Demolition Association and the Construction Materials Recycling Association, and also a professional associations all around the Environmental Business Council. Dan served for several years as a judge for the prestigious World Demolition Awards. And from that perch, he can see the leading edge of the deconstruction industry. So I'm glad to have Dan, because Dan, you bridge the early recognition of deconstruction and dismantling as a modern industry. And so I'm glad that you're seeing us into the future here too. So take it away, Dan.
Thank you, Pam. And 40 years goes by pretty quickly in the deconstructing world. So I wanted to bring, when Mike Elliott and Kathy asked me if I'd make a presentation for this meeting, it came to mind, we were doing this project, an industrial demolition project in the Boston Seaport area, a very obviously vibrant area of the Boston world right now. And we had some interesting aspects to this job that I thought would lend itself and would be interesting to this group. So Kathy, next slide, please. The case study we're doing is at 22 Dry Dock Ave. And many of you may be familiar with it. In the background is that big white building is the former Boston Army Center, and it's the now the current design center in Boston. The site where this is located had all been U.S. Navy property and part of the Navy base after World War I and World War II up until the 70s. So half its life, this site's recently spent as military, and the other half has been in commercial use, some of it used by the city of Boston for space. The next slide, please. Deconstruction is a very valuable tool for the demolition contractor. And we're always on the lookout for possibilities for deconstruction, for salvage of material, and always looking for recycling opportunities. derived from a demolition project. There are several things that attribute to a successful project. Kristen just mentioned some of them in the Simmons case study. One, you need salvageable materials, first of all. You need the space and the time to be able to extract those materials, and you have to have a safe work plan to allow that to happen. First of all, safely for the workforce, but also for the environment and the overall project. So sometimes it's a difficult challenge with contractual time constraints, and lots of times for space constraints on a site to be able to do salvage successfully and relatively easily. Next slide, please. This project was a LEED Platinum project, the build out. We're doing the demolition to provide the space for a LEED Platinum building that is being put up on this site. As part of that effort, a portion of the past of the building, where this was a U.S. Navy Public Works Department building initially. It was built in 1923. So the building is just celebrated or had its 100th anniversary. And as a tribute to that building, Related Beal, who was the developers and owners of the property, have had us salvage the very ornate Art Deco, it's a Public Works Department sign carved out of granite, had us carefully remove that from this site so that it can be incorporated into the new building, which was, a great homage to the past of this building and of the site. So we're very aware of throughout this process of it being a LEED Platinum project. Next one, please, Jeff. Early on, and actually from the first exposure to this building, we realized that there was a great salvage potential. The primary thing was that there were very substantial wood timbers that comprise the structural frame of the building. And over the years, we've developed a very efficient way of extracting and recovering that timber for its value to be resawn and reused. So we recognized that early on, and we designed our entire work plan for the project based upon being able to recover these timbers. And Kathy, the next slide, please, and we'll talk about that process. A great deal of planning had to go into this. So first of all, we had the two buildings on site, the lower building with the brick and concrete, sort of a tan and brick color, and then to the left, the Public Works building, 22 Dry Dock, which was a 3-story brick and wood frame structure. Our thought process was, first of all, both buildings had extensive asbestos abatement that had to be done. So including in the pictures, you see the roofing had to come off, it had asbestos content. The windows and window frames had to come out, as well as substantial abatement inside the buildings to recover asbestos materials. Part of our thought process in doing that, while abatement was taking place, we were also removing interior partitions, interior structures that were not recoverable, that may have been cross-contaminated or may have been asbestos material. Removing those in effect to expose and facilitate the removal subsequently of the structural timbers of the building. And the first thing after abatement, the first thing we wanted to do was remove the lower two-story building so that we had a very nice level work surface and storage surface on the slab that would be left after demolition of that lower building. So we took that building down first to give us room to take the building to the left down. Next one, Kathy. Here's that work area that was created, and you could see that we were able to carefully dissect, deconstruct, and dismantle the building, particularly using our high-reach excavator to very carefully go in and extract the timbers. We needed a lay-down place so that they could be sorted by size. We could do some preliminary cleaning of them so that they could be transported well. And we were able to have this space to let our work be conducted in an orderly manner. Next one, please. This type of thought process and this type of plan requires a very systematic process to take place. As we harvest material, we're also deconstructing the building by building component and separating that. And again, having the luxury of having created some space on the site, we had staging areas for the different debris streams that would be leaving the site as part of the demolition work. So that you can see in that process, we had all of these categories of material. Each of them needs to be separated. Each of them goes to a separate facility that specializes in that type of material. So it's a very big organizational task. It's one that requires a lot of experience in training and a lot of coordination with the crews on the job. We do that work almost primarily mechanically. Once the asbestos abatement is done, we really don't have a lot of labor on the site. We have machines and excavators with grapples and material handling devices and little skid steer loaders to separate things. And then we have trucks coming at regular intervals to remove each of the categories of material we're removing. Next one, please, Kathy. You know, you look at a building like 22 Dry Dock that had very nice timber recovery. We see some of it here. But that's the way we do all our building. Every one we try to undertake it with source separation. We try to maintain the site in as orderly and neat a condition as possible. Just for general site safety, for worker safety, for the safety of people who could be around the site. It's neat, it's organized, and we really want it to look like anything but a demolition project. So it's a very deliberate attempt that we have all the time to be managed in the way we dismantle a structure, but also separate and manage the debris coming from that building. Next one, Cap. the timbers are sort of a, they're a unique product. These timbers, as we said, were 100 years old. They were put in the building in 1923. That date alone told us a lot about the wood that was in the building and about the timbers before we even started, before we had the job. We knew a lot from the 1923 building date that wood was probably not southern yellow pine. By that point, southern yellow pine, that was a predominant building material in our textile factories and industrial 19th century mill buildings. By the early 1920s, that wood had been exhausted and it just wasn't available for construction. So this being a Navy building at the time, we realized that the wood probably came from the Pacific Northwest. And as it turned out, it was Douglas fir. These timbers are very, they're very substantial and certainly stout pieces of wood, but they're also very fragile. And, it's the old story, if you break it, you own it. And they're very easy to break if you don't handle them properly. So again, we have specialized equipment. We have crews that are used to extracting this type of material. The space that we create on the site, we use it to bundle and prepare loads of the timbers for safe and economic shipping. We have to be very careful about the physical dimensions of the loads so that we can truck them legally. We also have to be very cognizant of the weight of the load. So we knew that this being Douglas fir, we know it weighs about 3 pounds a board foot. So we were shipping loads of about 14,000 board feet per trailer, or about 42,000 pounds a load. So we could carry a maximum legal load to our destination. And again, that takes organization, takes a lot of handling and preparation, but by shipping neat bundles of timbers that are strapped and managed, it's easier to handle, easier to transport, and in the long run, it's worth more on the delivery end. So we pay a lot of attention to that. Next one, please. A lot of this wood was destined to a local sawmill that we use and have had a very nice relationship with for years and years, Katomet Sawmill down the Cape. As they receive, you see on the left-hand side above their sign, the stack of timbers as it was received at their facility. They have a big job once they get the stuff at their site. They sort by by species, which is a very, very important thing to them, because the species determines the end product and determines the end buyer for their materials. So they have to, each species produces, sort of specific looks and types of finished wood. So as they get that, the first thing they do is a very careful manual inspection of every single piece of timber. They use metal detectors, hand tools of all types to pull out nails, screws, bolts, staples, any type of metallic attachment, and believe me, there are a lot of them, on this wood that's been in a building for 100 years. At that point where they're finally satisfied that it's free of metal, they're able to go through a sawing process, and then they go through millers and planers and a kiln to dry the wood and make a finished product. Here we see in the middle, they cut, looks like 2.5-inch slabs, and they had an order for tabletops. So that is the Douglas fir finished, at least sawn and planed and put together as a tabletop. The majority of the wood is used in flooring, so you can see the different widths of flooring that they get out of trying to saw a log, a timber. And then they were able to extract some larger timbers, I think 10 by 10s. They had an order for columns in a post and beam house. So they're constantly sorting, analyzing inventory, developing markets for end product of the wood. And they're busy. The market is very, very good for this type of recovered lumber. So and that's good it's good for us all, because there's a ready market to be able to sell these timbers. Okay, Kath, next. So after 100 years as being the Public Works Department for the Navy and Boston Redevelopment's office for a good deal of that time, through the demolition process, we prepared a site that is ready for its new life. Related Beals Property, again, is the owner and developer of this site. And they're about to put up a new building for one of their life science clients that is an existing customer right next to where a new building will be. So we have to thank them. They're very supportive of our efforts. They're very supportive of the recycling and sort of sensitive way in which they handled the demolition of these buildings on site. To do it in a controlled manner, we're always concerned with recycling, of course, but in order to get there, you need to have good dust control, good vibration control, and you need to respect the surrounding community where you're working. And we try to do that all the time, and it's certainly a goal of the way that we conduct our dismantling operations. I think one more, Cap. So this is part of the material waste management plan that we will submit at the end of the project to Related Beal for their leads credit for the demolition portion of the work. So you can see that I think we came up with over 5,000 tons of material on site with about a 94% diversion or reuse percentage. And that attributes to, you saw all the categories of materials that we ship from the site, and they all went to very specific vendors for that. And those vendors were selected because they have high reuse of that feedstock. So we try to go to them to accomplish high recycling rates. One particular one was, we had really two types of mixed C&D material. And but we had an awful lot of wood. So we developed with Resource up in Epping, New Hampshire. They have a great fuel program where they manufacture fuel. And we had very, very high percentage wood content that stuff that was too small or broken, we unable to be reused in any way. Some of the stuff was the flooring boards that were less than an inch thick, and by the time you pulled them up, they'd break, so we couldn't save it. But we kept that wood separate as a source separated high percentage wood item that they were able to use in their fuel manufacturing process. And we got a break on disposal over a mixed C&D load. One of the only things we really had, a problem, I guess, and Kristen alluded to it later, was some adhesives and non-asbestos mastics. We had a bunch of concrete and concrete block walls that had styrofoam insulation glued to them. And we couldn't separate either of them, and they're both not worth anything. So we had 218 tons of that went out as sort of a difficult to manage debris. But it was a lot of hard work, it was a lot of planning, and there was a lot of attention to detail by our project management team and our crews on the site to commit to our goal to try to do things this way and to try to recycle, salvage as much as possible as we can from any building. So that's the Dry Dock Ave story. I certainly will look forward to any questions that anybody might have. Thank you, Kathy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dan. That was outstanding. In fact, all three speakers, I'm just thinking of all the takeaways, from Peter's presentation. I think about we've heard the greenest building is the one that's already built, right? And so you take that building and it becomes affordable housing. Or from the Simmons project, with the right leadership and champions and all the materials that can be captured that may not be connected to anything, but the demand was there and all these different markets that would take it. And same for you, Dan, the markets that you have for timbers that you're able to capture, and the importance of source separation of these materials, the care that you give to these materials that allows that to happen. It's fascinating. Thank you all to the speakers for sharing that. We have
Kathy,
about,
I was just thinking it's sort of what I presented and what we did flies a little bit in the face of the topic title for today's meeting, to deconstruct without demolition type of thing. But I mean, we try to recover doing demolition. So
absolutely. And
every building speaks to you differently.
And it's directing materials to a higher value, which is what you're doing. That's what you've demonstrated here and have done over the years. I mean, when I saw that large machine that you had that has the grapple that could grab the timber so carefully, it's remarkable.
I think so too. Every time I see it, and I own 3 of them. So
it's quite a toy, I'll say. We have about 15 minutes for questions, so I'm going to ask Michael Orbank, who has graciously offered to help facilitate questions here. And I see Phil Goddard has his hand up. So Phil, why don't you ask your question? And then Michael, I will pitch to you to maybe direct it.
Hey, everybody. Phil Goddard, Town of Bourne. I did put something in the chat about a repurposed materials organization out of the Midwest, which has a newsletter. Incredible opportunity for items. So I'd throw that in there for the chat, Kathy, for future reference, and maybe something can be done with Recycling Works. They use street sweeping brooms for bison back scratchers. It's pretty cool. Anyway, Dan, great job. I'm getting mixed messages here. I don't understand. Michael's saying that wood for fuel gets no consideration from LEED whatsoever. You might as well just not waste your time, just throw it in the landfill, because LEED doesn't give you any credit, which I think is an absurdity. So how is it in your spreadsheet you're accounting for it being diverted, yet I'm being told that you don't get credit for it for LEED certification? So is something amiss here? Because to me, when you take wood and you make electricity out of it, that's displacing, fossil fuels. You've proven that you've separated the grades and tried to do your best, but at the end of the day, you're making electricity. So why isn't that getting credit?
Well, Phil, there's been a long-standing ongoing battle with the leads committee for that type of thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes we in the demolition and recycling community feel picked upon somewhat because it's considered that demolition and recycling is too easy or the low-hanging fruit, and that the restrictions should be made more prohibitive to counting that. But regardless of how you keep score, the fact that that material is going to another use, a beneficial use, I would argue, some.
So would I, and certainly we have very little space in New England for.
Yeah, and those guys make a great fuel product. They have great customers. It goes to facilities with very environmentally controlled boilers to utilize it and turn it into steam and electricity. So we can get a break if we separate that material and bring it in a usable form to those facilities who have an end use. So whether or not we get the percentage point for it, it's not going in a landfill.
Yeah, and
And you need all the space you can get, Phil.
Kristen, it looks like, yeah, you had
Yeah, I was
something.
just going to say,
Yes.
because I'm working on the LEED materials tag group. We're writing the LEED version 5 materials credits, and we are talking a lot about the reuse and recycling and construction waste. And I think it's challenging because really LEED is trying to push the industry in the market, right? And so the ultimate goal of those recycling and demolition credits are to divert from the landfill, like Dan was saying, but also you really want to reward the innovation in the industries that are innovating and actually taking in, or the design teams that are finding repurposed solutions first, right?
Limited
And
opportunities
sometimes,
though, to get
yeah,
contaminated, like
Yeah,
mixed,
it's tough.
and that's
lead-based
why,
paint, yeah, right.
yeah, and that's why getting the designers and getting manufacturers to really make a product that's desirable, right? Or get more creative. So it's hard because they're trying, you don't want to discourage it, but yeah, it's really challenging.
Yeah, it's
So-
hard to reuse a broken board. In the case of the Dry Dock Ave. There were other outlets, there's Tafisa up in Canada, but I don't do this, and I don't have enough volume to devote a facility to making the material for them. So that was the best I could do.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that, your thoughts on this and your personal experience with it. And Michael, do you see any questions in the chat that could be addressed that we could
Yes, so
share?
there were two that I wanted to bring up to the speakers. The first one is a common problem that I think a lot of people in reuse and deconstruction are looking for, especially if we're in the many historic regions of Massachusetts, like Boston or elsewhere. How does the presence of potential hazardous material, whether it is asbestos, lead, or some sort of MassDEP, affect the ability to salvage these building materials? And to the speakers, when this does occur, are there any workarounds or considerations to be made?
Michael, it's always a question. It's the first thing you do when you start on a project. You get a very comprehensive asbestos and hazmat survey so that you can delineate right away what material is eligible for recycling, further handling, or what has to be treated as asbestos. More times than not, it would be, you think of asbestos in sort of not gray areas, but crossover areas. And it comes down to mastics. It comes down to, now we're seeing paint that is asbestos containing. So it takes a very detailed analysis of a building beforehand, and everyone is different. Every application is different. We had a building recently in Weymouth, the school building, that had a heavy white paint on the exterior of the building. And it ended up being asbestos containing paint. So there was so much concrete, there was 10,000 tons of concrete on the building. We set up a containment and we sandblasted all the paint off. And we were able to, in that way, create, first of all, we avoided 10,000 tons of material going over the road to Ohio, to a landfill. But secondly, we created a recycling opportunity for 10,000 tons of concrete that was then clean, unpainted, to be reused locally, which it was. So you have to be, there's a constant cost analysis, and there's, a constant thinking beyond the box in some of the things that involve asbestos and hazmat. But asbestos, PCBs, lead, sometimes they all take very special considerations.
The only last question I can bring up, because I know we're almost at time, and this, I'll open all the speakers, and also if Abby Massaro was still here. Talking about other materials that can be reclaimed from these commercial projects, whether it is something like a historic brick, a smaller lumber, or other building materials. What have you all seen that is maybe some low-hanging fruit, or has different avenues for reuse that the commercial applications and some residential applications maybe just aren't thinking about right now?
I think one thing that maybe was not celebrated enough in some of these projects, including Simmons and Elias Brookings schools, was the removal of cabinetry and some hardware. Of course, there's a strong market for that, for Eco Building Bargains and Boston Building Resources, maybe in some of the habitats. As Kristen mentioned in the chat, doors are a really big opportunity as well, but we don't really have a great network to reclaim and then redistribute those yet, but hopefully that is gonna come on board one of these days. Yeah, anything else, Kristen or Dan?
It's really hard. I mean, there's so many there's so many individual things. Like lighting has become outdated, so maybe with the next generation of lighting, now that mostly we're all LEDs, those will be reusable, but sometimes you can reuse the fixture and just change out the parts, but it is challenging.
One of our biggest problems, Kristen, is back to one of your points, is the time that we have to do this. And we're usually pressed for time. We're a union contractor, so our labor rates are high. It's sometimes difficult to bring outside groups in with, labor contracts and that type of thing. But it is a challenge to recover a lot of material.
But as you said, Dan, there sometimes with the level of care that you're giving, the value on the market end can work out for you, can sort of make up for that time that's taken up front. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot of calculus involved. And you need a willing owner that you're working with as well. Related Beer was very generous, and I mean, we certainly complied with all the project schedules, but we were very open about what we wanted to do and what our goals were of salvage and recycling, and they had us out, as a group out one day, and were very, very welcoming to the whole group to come out and look at the work in progress. So the owner is very important, time is very important, space is very important, and above all, having the commitment to do that.
Yeah, that's a great summary.
So incentives for the owner sounds like something from a policy perspective that could maybe help this as well, when I think about what drives the owner, right? What would enable that from where we sit. I guess one last question. I don't know if there are any more, Michael, that you see, but I was curious for Costello to hear about the crews that know how to do this, your crew. Was it specialized training for them to learn to do some of this dismantling, or would you say that others that work in this industry, there are similar types of experience that would be transferable and be usable in a dismantling or deconstruction space as one would have in other spaces that are traditional demolition?
Well, as I mentioned, Costello Dismantling is almost 40 years old, and I was doing it before that for a while, but as you can tell by this, I have crew members that have been with me, a lot of them well over 25 years, and we've done countless buildings like this. So we do things a particular way. We do things in a way that, as you alluded to, our vendors tell us how they want material, and we pay attention to what they do. So we've designed our equipment fleet around that. We've done on-the-job training of textile mills and all sorts of mills for years and years in all of New England, all of the Northeast. And we just get adept at knowing what to do. So I know it's certainly other demo contractors will salvage timbers and sell them, but we do it a particular way, and we know our vendors notice the difference in the materials that we send them versus other materials they get. Comes in one piece.
And that's part of that relationship building, right? It's those
Yeah,
partnerships.
absolutely.
Over time, they get to know quality, you know what they are looking for, and you
Right.
can deliver.
And as Mike Elliott just said on the chat room on this job, I mean, we were low bidder on the job. It was blood and guts bidding it, so we were low bidder, and we were happy with the way it turned out.
Awesome. On that positive note, I want to thank the speakers. Because we have just another minute or two left, but that's wonderful to hear. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for sharing these incredible experiences and inspiring what's possible and knowing what's already happening. What I'll do is you can look at this last slide here, but
That's
this
a nice
is just
picture, Kathy.
I took it when we visited that day, right? I thought, well, it just really shows what it is, right? It was so impressive to see that.
Pretty nice wood, isn't it?
It really was, there's nothing like seeing it up close and personal. When Michael Elliott and Susan Casino and I went and visited this particular site, it's incredible learning opportunity for us as well. I wanted to just end with a couple of announcements here. We usually just schedule our next work group meeting so that you all know what's coming. It'll be in January, so here's the date. And if Janice can put the link to it in the chat, otherwise folks can grab the link when we send out the presentation. This is just to pre-register if folks want to register far in advance for that January 17th to get it on your calendar. And then, in the coming months, I'll be working with the planning team to put together the topic that we'll be covering for that. A couple of other additional announcements here. I just wanted to mention, if you weren't familiar with this already, that the federal government just recently announced $100 million in grants for manufacturers of what they're calling cleaner construction materials, with really an eye toward directing substantial federal funding toward reclaimed building material sector and low embodied carbon construction products. So again, if you're able to pop that link in the chat, Janice, that will let people go directly to that to learn more about that opportunity, because that's for businesses in this space. And last but certainly not least, Pam Howland had mentioned this early on in the introductions, but Build Reuse, which is a national nonprofit that works on reuse and recycling of building materials, is holding a webinar today at 4 o'clock our time, 4 o'clock Eastern time. And it looks to me that the topic of this webinar at 4 o'clock is about helping to understand the language of embodied carbon so that entities that want to apply for some of those big grants can understand it more deeply and put together some effective applications for those federal grants. So if this fits you and has appeal, it's a great opportunity to learn more. So I am just going to close the meeting at that. Let you all know that we'll see you in January. You've got my contact information on this very last slide. Janice, who's working with me now on this with MassDEP. I'm really grateful for Janice's help today. And the final link on here is to all of our recordings and the presentations. We'll have the presentations and info from today posted within the next week or so, so that everything will be on the website. And I think we're closing only about a minute or so late, so I'll let y'all go. But thank you everyone for your time today and all that you shared. We learned a lot.
Kathy.
Okay, be well.
Thank you.
Job. Thanks, Kathy.